Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The mission that has been laid out for the incoming, presuming she is confirmed, Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. And it has nothing to do with wrestling. His promise, of course, to dismantle the department, to get rid of the Department of Education and, quote unquote, send it back to the states, is something that we want to explore with someone who has run the department. As always, we try to bring you practitioners, people with experience, voices of experience here on Bloomberg, which is why we're glad to have Arne Duncan with us today. He was the U.S. Secretary of Education in the Obama administration. He's now managing partner at Emerson Collective. And Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. I appreciate the time, and I'm glad to have a couple of moments with you because we do have some questions. And it's clear to us that most Americans don't really have a great sense of what the Department of Education does. So if it were in fact removed or quote unquote sent back to the states, what would families, what would students lose?
Well, first of all, I think it's almost impossible that he's going to eliminate the Department of Education. I honestly think that's just another empty campaign promise. And the fact is, you know, the vast majority of funding K-12 actually comes from the states and local communities and districts. So send it back to the states. That's where the action already is. But your question is a good one. What does the department actually do? And I'll give you a couple of examples. It works very, very hard to make sure hundreds of thousands, millions of young children have access to high quality pre-K. And getting our babies off to a great start is arguably the most important thing we can do. On the K-12 side, lots of funding for children with special needs, children with disabilities. That's desperately important, 7.5 million children. Lots of funding for children who live below the poverty line. At the higher education side, obviously does a tremendous amount to make college more accessible and more affordable. So sort of whether it's from babies to folks in college, the Department of Education plays a critical role. And to remove opportunity from children, from families, obviously makes no sense to me whatsoever.
What would it mean for funding for disabled students, Secretary?
Well, it's again, 7.5 million children with disabilities. And last time I checked, those are children whose families, some vote Democratic, some vote Republican. It just doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And to see that funding disappear, to make sure that children now have access to a free and fair public education, that did not used to be the case. Many local districts used to discriminate and keep children with disabilities out of their public schools. It took the federal Department of Education, it took the intervention at the federal level to make sure children had that access. To take that away, that's not going to fly with parents. That's not, it hurt children, it hurt families. Honestly, it hurt the Republican Party. So, my best advice to them would be to not even think about doing anything to hurt our most vulnerable children, whether they're children with disabilities, children with special needs, children who live below the poverty line. Those are the kids that need the best education we can provide them. They don't need something less than that.
Mr. Secretary, I hate to interrupt you, but we have some breaking news that I need to mention. I'd love for you to just stand by for one moment as I tell you and our audience that we have news on the former Congressman Matt Gaetz, who is apparently withdrawing his name from consideration to be the next Attorney General. Matt Gaetz on the X profile. I had excellent meetings with senators yesterday. He writes that he appreciates their thoughtful feedback, incredible support. While the momentum was strong, it is clear. Matt Gaetz writes, quote, "My confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition. He says there's no time to waste on a needlessly protracted Washington scuffle, therefore withdrawing my name from consideration to serve as Attorney General. He says Trump's DOJ must be in place and ready on day one." At 12:27 p.m. Eastern Time, Matt Gaetz, the former congressman, he resigned his seat for this opportunity, is no longer in the running to be the Attorney General. We're going to have a lot more on this with our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us coming up here as we spend time with Arne Duncan, the former Secretary of Education. You can weigh in on that, by the way. Arne, I don't know if you choose to, but you've been through the confirmation process, and there have been a lot of questions about some of the names that have been brought forth. Does this tell you anything about the senators who are going to make the decision, have been actually considering their next move here to see Matt Gaetz drop out this quickly?
Well, that obviously had to happen. And, unfortunately, he and frankly, so many other potential cabinet nominees by President Trump, one commonality, one common theme is that many of them have allegations of sexual abuse and being sexual predators. And for me, it's just mind-boggling. It's stunning that folks of this character or lack thereof are being considered for cabinet posts. So that was the right thing to do. He never had a chance. And hopefully, again, maybe they'll pick somebody worse. You don't know what's going to happen here. But to have someone who has broken so many laws that just preyed upon young girls, having him somehow be the Attorney General of the United States, it boggles the mind.
Well, instant reaction from Arne Duncan. What do you remember from that experience, walking the halls of the Senate, meeting with senators? What happens when you go into these offices for the sit-down?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's what's so sad to me. What I honestly, feel is that what President like Trump and others are trying to do is really to weaponize and politicize education. And I always say education should be the ultimate bipartisan issue or nonpartisan issue. There's nothing left or right or Republican and Democrat about more babies having access to pre-K and more kids reading at grade level and raising high school graduation rates and trying to lead the world in college completion. So I worked with all of my Republican colleagues, spent time with them, visited their communities. I think my confirmation, I think it was unanimous, and was felt very grateful that I had that kind of bipartisan support, because I think people understood that there was nothing political about me or about my mission to give kids a better chance at life. And somehow we have totally lost that. It doesn't mean we don't have legitimate differences in terms of policy disagreements. You're always going to have that. But I appreciated the chance to work with my Republican colleagues, congressmen, senators, governors. The confirmation process was definitely harrowing. I was a new kid, new to DC and new to the ways, but was treated beyond fairly, thoughtfully, with consideration. And I tried to return that level of respect to the folks I worked with.
I remember that very well, as a matter of fact, and you were kind to come visit us when I was working in satellite radio for one of your first town hall conversations, and how your life must have changed and how the lives of all of these nominees will change. I can't begin to imagine. But while we have a couple of minutes left with you, I want to drill down a little bit more on what we were talking about, because while we did hear promises to eliminate the department, you don't seem to buy that, and I don't think Congress will either. We have some direction from the America First Policy Institute that has proposed changes on behalf of the Trump transition team, including stopping schools from, quote, promoting inaccurate and unpatriotic concepts, unquote, about American history surrounding institutionalized racism. This is critical race theory, I presume they're referring to. Secretary, what would that mean by the direction of a Trump-run Department of Education?
Right. And again, I just have to repeat myself. I hate the weaponization. I hate the politicization of anything having to do with education, because it's so critical to our nation. What they do is they attack any three-letter acronym. So call it CRT, call it DEI, call it SEL. They attack that. Those aren't the issues that people are worried about. What are the real issues? We have tens of millions of children who are very far behind academically coming out of the pandemic. We have to help them catch up as fast as we can through high dosage tutoring. We have kids that are chronically absent who haven't come back to school. We have to go find them, knock on doors, bring them in. We need to attract and retain the best teachers we can. This is a very tough time to be in education. We have to continue to raise high school graduation rates, because if you drop out of high school today, you're basically condemned to poverty and social failure. There are no good jobs out there for you. We have to educate our way to a better economy. We have to continue to make college more accessible and affordable. Those are the kinds of real issues that touch real parents and real children and real communities that whoever leads the Department of Education should be focused on, not these distractions. They sort of manufacture fear about things that don't make sense instead of spending time on things that do. And if you talk to parents, what are parents worried about today? They're worried about their children's mental health. They're worried about bullying in schools, and they're worried about school shootings. And whether you attack the department or dismantle the department, do whatever, that has nothing to do with helping parents and helping children be successful. The vast majority of parents in America, they don't care. They could care less about the Department of Education. They care about their local school. They care passionately about their child. That's where the focus has to be, not on these political, made-up, divisive issues. Really is disheartening. It's so troubling to me.
Well, I really appreciate your honesty in answering these questions. Lastly, what do you think of Linda McMahon at the top of the agency? There's no reason to believe that she will do all of the things that Donald Trump suggests, but you've got someone with no background in education. Remembering, of course, you ran the school system in Chicago before you had that job.
Yeah, and I guess my bigger concern, and obviously I don't know her, have never met her, but my biggest concern is that if you look at a number of his cabinet nominees, starting with Matt Gaetz, these are not people who anybody can trust. And I really worry that he is very intentionally trying to create distrust of all institutions. He's done that with the media. He's done that with science. He's doing that with his cabinet nominees, trying to create distrust in our own government. I worry he's trying to create distrust in our neighborhood schools. And that, unfortunately, is what authoritarian leaders do, is they try and sow distrust in any institution and become the only source of knowledge, the only source of truth. So again, I've never met her, don't have any sense. Obviously, she has no background to do this job. The story was that she wanted to be the Commerce Secretary, but the guy who he picked to do that gave him more money. So this was her consolation prize. I just hope she comes in, listens to children, listens to teachers, listens to parents, and does the right thing to help America. I always say our military is our best defense, but a great education system is our best offense. I truly hope we don't lose the plot here, because the consequences for our children, families, and nation would be extraordinarily serious.
Spoken from someone who's run the Department of Education. Arne, Duncan, appreciate your time very much. With breaking news today from Washington, the former Congressman Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name from consideration to be the next Attorney General. We'll have more from our panel next. Rick and Jeanne are on the way here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We do have a big breaker here, and it's a redhead on the terminal. Matt Gaetz is out. Of course, it's a Twitter announcement, or X, as we now call it. Elon Musk's platform brings us the news again. Matt Gaetz says he had excellent meetings with senators yesterday, but he's become a distraction. Quote, "It is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition," he says. No time to waste on a needlessly protracted Washington scuffle. And the scuffle was already well underway. It was at this time yesterday that we were talking about the Ethics Committee in the U.S. House meeting at an undisclosed location to vote on whether to release its report into Matt Gaetz and the salacious allegations against him that he has denied. No resolution, no agreement, split down the middle, report still under wraps. But there's now a Democratic-led effort in the U.S. House to have this made public. Sean Casten, who was with us just 2 days ago, Democrat from Illinois, had some pretty strong words about Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump in our conversation, has brought a privileged resolution to the floor, easy for me to say, that will force a vote, a full House vote, on whether to make the ethics report public. Now, that starts the clock. You remember how this works. We wonk out here on Balance of Power on a 2-day countdown, so that means it's going to happen after Thanksgiving. Lawmakers will come back. They will vote on this. But maybe now it doesn't matter. We talked to, by the way, no fan of Matt Gaetz, the congressman from New York. Mike Lawler, Republican, talked to us just ahead of the news of Matt Gaetz dropping out, just to get a sense of where people's heads were. This is a Republican again talking. Here's Congressman Lawler.
President Trump is certainly entitled, as president-elect, to nominate whoever he sees fit to serve in that role. And the Senate obviously has the process by which to confirm. I stand by everything I've ever said about Matt Gaetz. I don't waver in that belief. Do I think he's the right person? No. But ultimately, that will be a decision by the Senate.
Well, not anymore. Let's assemble our political panel. Jeanne Zaino is with us, Senior Democracy Fellow, Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst. And I'm glad to say that Rick Davis is back with us today, Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and partner at Stone Court Capital. Rick, this was a quick one. I don't know how this compares in history, but the withdrawal came within days of Matt Gaetz being announced. What do you make of this development?
Well, I think the key thing is he withdraws within 24 hours after his meeting in the Senate yesterday. And we can only speculate that it obviously didn't go according to his plan. I think there was plenty of senators, probably more than he would need, to reject his confirmation, express serious reservations about his fitness for office. And I think that he took that literally and didn't want to walk the plank. Senators were saying things like, this is going to be much worse than the Kavanaugh hearings, which we all remember were sort of out of control screaming fest. So rather than put himself through that and wind up without a job, I think he's taken the best route and withdrawn. Now, we haven't heard the last of Matt Gaetz. I mean, he withdrew from the House of Representatives last Wednesday, yes. And now he needs a job. So it'll be interesting to see what the Trump team comes up with next.
Does need a job, and I think they're going to need a senator in Florida if Marco Rubio is confirmed as head of the State Department. Jeanne, these must have been some pretty rough meetings yesterday, unless Matt Gaetz got some phone calls last night, or are you among those who think that this whole thing was a setup to begin with to get him out of whatever the ethics committee found in their investigation?
No, I have no evidence to suggest this was a setup. It seems to be in keeping with the way Trump operates. And, to me, this entire thing, if it wasn't bad enough within the last few hours, as we heard, that, he's doing things like transporting women to New York City, going to see Pretty Women on Broadway, the ultimate show and movie about a, hooker with a heart of gold. And he's paying these women on Venmo. I mean, it jumped the shark so long ago. It became outrageous to think he could have survived in this contest, or that Republicans would have wanted to put this thing out in the public. But, Rick is onto something. He needs a job, right? He can skirt Senate confirmation if they put him in the White House. But don't forget, he was elected to the House of Representatives. He only resigned from the seat he currently holds. He can move himself right back into the House of Representatives. And, he's a flamethrower, so he may not mind so much, because as of now, we know so much of what was in that report already. If ethics decides to pick it up again, he could be there to make Republicans' lives miserable. So he's got a lot of options, and it's certainly not the last time we've heard of Matt Gaetz.
Wow. A lot there from Jeanne. We just heard from Donald Trump, Truth Social. I greatly appreciate the recent efforts. I'm reading directly from his post of Matt Gaetz in seeking approval to be Attorney General. Donald Trump writes he was doing very well, but at the same time did not want to be a distraction for the administration, for which he has much respect. Matt has a wonderful future. Donald Trump says, I look forward to watching all of the great things he will do. Does that sound like somebody who wants to bring Gaetz into the White House, Rick?
Well, I think he has already made that pretty clear that he wanted him in the cabinet. There are plenty of sub-cabinet level jobs that won't get the scrutiny that Attorney General would have brought onto him. So, yeah, I don't think they're going to just cut him loose. Frankly, he's probably more dangerous to Donald Trump without a job in the administration than he is with one. That way they can at least keep track of what he's up to. But you mentioned it earlier. There is going to be a vacancy, in the United States Senate from Florida. That's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities that Matt Gaetz would show up in that same caucus that just beat him up yesterday. Won't be the first senator that comes up there with some wounds, but it would be certainly a rock thrown against the glass of the Republican caucus in the Senate if he winds up a colleague.
Wow. Jeanne, this has taken the light off of Pete Hegseth today. Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense nominee, is actually walking the halls of the Senate, meeting with senators today, as Matt Gaetz did yesterday. And I don't know about the timing here, but it's just last night that a police report came out from Monterey, California, about his experience with a woman in 2017 who accused him of sexual assault. It goes further than that, Jeanne, and I'm sure you've read this. The records released show the woman told an emergency room nurse that she may have been drugged and was then assaulted by a man she later identified as Pete Hegseth. Where are we going with this nomination? What are these meetings today?
He was in those meetings today. The report is very damning. He said something that at least caught my attention today, speaking to reporters. When he was asked about that report, he said something like, as far as the media is concerned, I have been cleared. And it was that preface as far as the media is concerned. That is very strange way to preface that. Of course, he wasn't cleared. He just was not charged with this, and he did then pay off this woman. The question I think for Donald Trump and the transition team here once again is, number one, did he tell them about this, or did he pull the wool over their eyes? It's one thing if he is not honest with, say, viewers on Fox News for those years he's on there, but it's another thing if he didn't tell the transition team, who of course has put their own hands tied behind their back by not using the FBI to investigate and to vet these folks. So, it's all part of that. But I think the big thing about Pete Hegseth, even more damning, if you can say that, or equally damning, is his absolute lack of qualifications to run this department by any stretch of the imagination. And that's true of many of these nominees, but Pete Hegseth and Matt Gaetz take the cake for that. And that's what I think Democrats need to focus on.
Well, it's crazy we're talking about this. I even get a special background for it if you're with us on YouTube. Rick, I'm running out of questions for you guys here. Yes, we have the police report, but we have something else. Maybe I should say we have someone else, Rick. Someone actually, I think named Joni Ernst. Pete Hegseth says women should not be allowed in combat. There are going to be some Republicans, including Joni Ernst, a combat veteran on the Judiciary panel, who have a problem with that approach. Rick, what is more challenging to Hegseth's confirmation? The police report, which, by the way, he denies the allegations, or his position, for instance, on women in combat?
Well, I think you adequately made the point, Joe. It's his past position. He wouldn't be the first cabinet appointee to go to his confirmation hearing and do a little bit of flip-flopping. I was at a national security conference yesterday, and this was addressed by a lot of the 4-stars that were there. And their point was, we can be gender blind. And if you are ready for the job, you should fill it. And I wouldn't be surprised that that's the comments that he makes if he gets as far as getting a confirmation hearing. It won't be just Joni Ernst going after him on these issues. This is a bipartisan approach to the military that has been, frankly, rewarded by enhancing our security with women in combat. And he's not likely to hold on to that stream if he wants to get through confirmation unscathed.
As we spend time with Rick and Jeanne, our signature panel here, if you're with us on YouTube today, I'm now in the Upside Down. Oh, no, look, we're back in Washington. Jeanne, what's your take on this? The police report or the position on women in combat create a greater challenge to the nominee for SecDef?
Can I have a third choice of all of the above and
Please.
More?
Okay.
You mentioned Joni Ernst, and it's a great example. Let's look at Tammy Duckworth. She is a double amputee vet, and she is going to face this man who has said in the past, and we'll have to hear what he says if he actually gets to confirmation hearings, that women shouldn't serve in combat. I wonder how that's going to go over with Senator Duckworth. And, he can claim that these positions are in the past, so he will have to defend those. If he decides to waffle on them and change his mind, he's going to have to defend that. But there's far more where that is. And I go back to the fact that Pete Hegseth, for all of his military service, has never, ever shown the ability to run an organization as big as the Department of Defense in terms of the budget, in terms of the personnel. And so the qualifications issue alone is one that has to be addressed in addition to all these other things. And this is what's so concerning to so many people in the defense area, is the fact that he has absolutely no background in this.
Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, our signature panel.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
We want to get more on this now as we dissect what exactly has happened here and what it means, and turn to our signature political panel. Jeanne Zaino is with us. She is Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Stone Court Capital partner Rick Davis. They are Democrat and Republican analysts, respectively. Rick, I would love to hear from you here just on timing. While we all knew the writing might be on the wall with this one, it looked like it was going to be a steep uphill climb for Gaetz to be confirmed. He was just on Capitol Hill yesterday with the Vice President-elect J.D. Vance trying to fight the fight here. Why give it up when November's not even over?
Yeah, it was pretty precipitous. We can only speculate that the meeting with the senators was not positive. If you saw Lindsey Graham's reaction coming out of the Capitol last night, he was not particularly happy. And of course, he would be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee that would process that hearing in his committee. So I think he is a telling person, who was, by the way, up until the end of yesterday, strongly supporting Matt Gaetz confirmation. So he's another one who's probably been injured by this since he leaned in so hard on it. The reality is it's a little unusual because also Donald Trump was making phone calls to senators, which is not unusual into itself, but you would have thought he'd want to see how that meeting took place before he weighed in directly with the senators on that committee. So I'd say setback for Team Trump on their transition. They're going to have to fall back. I have no doubt that they were, up until this announcement, fully prepared to charge ahead with his confirmation. And now they're going to have to fall back and figure out who else to put up.
Jeanne, there was a Democratic-led effort, I should say is one because it's still underway, under privilege resolution to have a full House vote on whether to release formally, publicly, the Ethics Committee report into Matt Gaetz. Is there any point in pursuing that as the Democrat on our panel? Do you still want that to be made public?
I don't think there's a rush to do it. Certainly, the committee is going to meet again next week on the 5th if they keep to that schedule. I think it's important that they do work together and respect the rules of the House. And so I don't think there's any real reason to rush that out. But again, it depends on what happens with Matt Gaetz next. Where does he go? Does he fight Laura Trump to become senator of Florida? Does he come back to the House, as you were talking to Wendy about? Does he get into the White House, skirting confirmation by the Senate? But I would say, for all of Trump's bravado in this process, and his attempts to try to skirt around the confirmation process and talk about recess appointments and those kinds of things, it is to the credit of the Senate that whatever happened, they stood up, and the GOP in the Senate, and apparently were at least able to convince Matt Gaetz that this was a no-go. And that is a win for James Madison. So here to James Madison for giving us these checks and balances, because it is a win for him and for all of us.
Well, it might also be a win for Senator John Thune, the incoming majority leader, Rick, who was going to have to navigate what could have been a really tricky situation with this confirmation. And I wonder if this now opens a window for instead scrutiny and perhaps a little bit of pushback on the president-elect from the majority in the Senate in regard to other nominees, thinking here Pete Hegseth or Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, there seems to be a realization in Mar-a-Lago that these things could inure to the detriment of the president-elect. So pulling the plug this early on Matt Gaetz was, I think, a surprise to all. And I'm sure they are monitoring the media and the senators' reactions to other controversial cabinet picks that you've just described. So I think this is TBD. The good news about the Senate is they weren't the ones who had to pull the plug on Matt Gaetz. Certainly some in the caucus weren't happy with this. They made themselves known yesterday, probably enough to thwart the nomination if it came to a floor vote. But the reality is they were able to see his nomination pulled by his withdrawal without actually having to spend any political capital themselves. So they have plenty charged up. The Majority Leader Thune is indicated that this process will move forward, different from some early indications that there might be a mass recess appointment of the cabinet. So we're learning as we go along with this new Trump cabinet, and it seems to be more balanced with the Senate than I think many observers thought it might be.
It seems we're learning more about Pete Hegseth as well, Jeanne, and I wonder your thoughts on how this breaking news about Matt Gaetz, the reaction he apparently got in the Senate yesterday, might inform what happens to Donald Trump's nominee for defense secretary. It was just last night, interesting timing, that a police report was made public, as we've been discussing, about accusations by a woman that Hegseth, she says, sexually assaulted her. There is some new information in here. As the records show, the woman told an emergency room nurse that she may have been drugged that night. This is something we were looking at in a vacuum until this Matt Gaetz headline broke today. What could this mean for Pete Hegseth?
You know, I think it is a reflection of the inadequate vetting that has gone on here, particularly in the case of Pete Hegseth. I mean, I can't imagine that they didn't realize about Matt Gaetz because that investigation had been going on in the House for so long. But Pete Hegseth, apparently the transition team was surprised to get this news about the payoff, and now yesterday the police report. So this is what happens. And Karl Rove said this yesterday: inadequate vetting, rushing, disregarding people's qualifications, thirst for revenge. All of those things have left a Trump team which had a pretty good first week of nominees with these really difficult nominees. And, I think it's going to fall on J.D. Vance, who is the Sherpa. He was the Sherpa of Gaetz. He is now the Sherpa of Hegseth, to see what inroads they can make in the Senate. But there are very, very many questions in the Senate and in the defense area about Pete Hegseth, not just this, but his qualifications and his views. All of those things are going to come through in a confirmation process. And the question for the Trump team is, do they want to put themselves through this if there were more particularly salacious, things to come out?
With instant analysis to news that Matt Gaetz is withdrawing his name from nomination to be the next Attorney General, Jeanne Zaino and Rick Davis, our signature panel, thank you both so much as we add the voice of a congressman in Don Beyer, a member of the Democratic Conference in the U.S. House, Don Beyer of Virginia. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Congressman. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the day Matt Gaetz must have had in the U.S. Senate. But regarding the House, and I understand we're going to talk a bit later with your colleague, Sean Casten, who had a privileged resolution to force a floor vote on whether to make public the Ethics Committee investigation, the report into Matt Gaetz. Do you think that should still happen?
Yes, I do. Although there will be less pressure to do it now that he's no longer a candidate for Attorney General. Matt had alienated so many people on both sides of the aisle that we expected quite a few Republican votes to actually see the report. It's less important now unless he decides to come back. He won the election. He resigned from this Congress, but he hasn't resigned from the next Congress yet. So this may be not moot yet.
Well, so Congressman, is it your understanding that he could just simply take that seat? Does he have to take the seat in order to then resign it? So does he have to show up on January 3rd? Just what exactly is the procedure here?
Kailey, good question. And we relied on Joe Morelli, who's the Democrat who leads the House Administration Committee. And he basically said, we don't know. We've not really been in this position before. But it's not clear that he can resign a seat that he's not been sworn into yet. But if he doesn't show up, what happens then? In any case, I think an awful lot of people think that whether he serves or not, that the people have a right to know what that ethics report says. And certainly that's the way I will vote to release it.
We did hear from the aforementioned Sean Casten in a statement following the news of Matt Gaetz's withdrawal. While I welcome the news, he says, it remains important that the Gaetz report be made available to the American people. If he's not serving in Congress, Don Beyer, why would that be?
Well, part of it, Joe, is the larger picture that we have Pete Hegseth also, credibly accused of rape. We have some, I think it's in the double digits numbers of cabinet and sub-cabinet officials that are circulating right now that have had charges of sexual assault, including RFK Jr., that this seems to be the new qualification for Trump cabinet. I think the more we address this directly, and hopefully with the clear message that we want people who are have high integrity, that treat women with respect, treat each other with respect, should be part of what it means to be a cabinet member in this United States.
Well, and as we think about women here in particular, Congressman, I'm sure you've seen, as many of us had, the reports, the police reports specifically of the incident in 2017, allegations of sexual assault regarding a different cabinet nominee, the defense secretary designate Pete Hegseth. Now that some of the scrutiny will be taken off of Matt Gaetz, since he's withdrawn himself from consideration, it could put a greater spotlight on that individual in particular. Do you expect he will face an uphill battle to Senate confirmation over some of these very same issues you were just alluding to?
Very much so, Kailey. And it begins with the sexual assault allegations, some of his family past. But it's going to quickly move on to the fact that a National Guardsman with service overseas, which we very much respect, has never managed an organization more than 30 people, moving on to one of the largest and most complicated organizations in the world. When you move in somebody like Lloyd Austin or Jim Mattis, who have managed in the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, that's a very different set of management and leadership skills than what Pete Hegseth has shown us so far. And what we mostly know of him is his advocacy for returning a Navy SEAL badge to somebody who shot a handcuffed man in the back of the head and was convicted of murder.
I don't know anything about that, Congressman, but I do want to ask you about the looming choice for Treasury Secretary. Is this something that you're concerned about because it's taken so long, even though we're pretty early in the game here, but following the names that you've seen already, a lot of folks with the aim of torching the agency that they've been put in charge of have been named by Donald Trump to the joy of many of his supporters. Are we going to get a name like that for Treasury based on who you're hearing?
Joe, my great concern is that not so much that a Treasury Secretary will try to tear down the U.S. dollar, but rather that he or she will buy into the Trump commitment to 10 and 20% tariffs on every one of our trading partners and 60% plus on the Chinese. We've already discovered the American people hate inflation, and yet he's about to do the most inflationary thing possible, which is drive up consumer prices all across our country. It would be wonderful if you would appoint a Treasury Secretary who would be a constraint on really bad economic policy that's coming out of the 2025 playbook and out of Donald Trump.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We appreciate your time. That is the Democratic Congressman representing Virginia's 8th District, Don Beyer.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Great to have you with us on Bloomberg TV and radio, the Thursday edition of Balance of Power, live from Washington. It's been a pretty busy day around here with breaking news, and the more news breaks, the more questions we have. As we learned a little more than an hour ago, Matt Gaetz, former congressman from Florida, has withdrawn his name from nomination to be the next attorney general. This was, of course, among the most controversial of Donald Trump's picks to fill out the cabinet. He resigned his House seat, as we told you, upon the announcement of that nomination last week. And so there's a concerted debate underway right now, Kailey Leinz, about whether to release the Ethics Committee report, the investigation into Matt Gaetz' salacious allegations he has denied. And our next guest, who was with us just a couple of days ago, brought a privileged resolution to the floor of the House to bring a full House vote to potentially force the release of this ethics report. We could still see this, even though he is no longer in contention.
Yeah, and that's really what we want to get into now, as the clock has started on 2 legislative days, knowing that Congress is about to embark on a week-long recess for the Thanksgiving holiday. What's going to happen when we come back in early December? So let's turn now to Congressman Casten, Sean Casten, of course, the Democrat representing Illinois' 6th District, who put forward this privilege resolution, as Joe says, yesterday. Congressman, thanks for coming back to balance of power. If he is not going to be Attorney General, having withdrawn his name from consideration here, and if he is no longer going to be a member of the House of Representatives, why would this report need to come out if it's just a report looking into what would then be a private U.S. citizen?
Well, I'd put the question to you or viewers in any workplace. If you in your office knew that there was someone in the office who had serious allegations of sexual misconduct, including sex with a minor, and that person resigned from their office, would you be satisfied working in that workplace if they said, we're not going to continue this anymore? It doesn't matter what we know. That would be inexcusable in any other office. It was appropriate remember, the Ethics Committee was prepared to release this information in July. Because of the recess, they then punted that into a few weeks ago. They then punted again, and they now, based on their vote yesterday, on a straight party line basis, the Republicans on committee deadlocked with the Democrats and voted to punt again. This information should come out. We will continue to push in our office to make sure it comes out, because the allegations are serious, and it is in the good of the House, and it is in the good of making sure that the American people trust that the House holds itself to account, that we know what's in this report.
Your workplace analogy having been made, Congressman, I wonder if you're also concerned about Matt Gaetz serving in a different capacity in this White House, or maybe more so if he were to show up for the 119th Congress, to which he was elected, and actually take his seat back in January.
All those things are possibilities, and we can't predict the future. All we can do is to make sure that we make the right moral decision in the point we're in right now. And this one, to my mind, is fairly unambiguous.
Well, so as we consider the path forward here, we had understood the Ethics Committee was going to be meeting again on this matter on December 5th. The ranking Democratic member of that committee, Susan Wild, said so herself. There's been, Congressman, as I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of chatter in the last week about whether or not this is going to come out either way, through formal means or otherwise. Would it be your hope, if the Ethics Committee can't find a way forward and your vote, your privilege resolution can't force this to happen, that this would leak out? Or if the formal institutions of the House have made it not so, should it indeed remain a secret if that is what your colleagues decide?
Well, I think there's a series of questions there, and let's unpack each of them. The Ethics Committee report is done. Notwithstanding what Mr. Guest has said, remember that they were prepared to vote on this in July. There was no discussion that the report wasn't done. So the Ethics Committee can make all of this go away by simply releasing the report that they were prepared to release in July. If the Ethics Committee is unable to do their ethical responsibility, then we can use the privileged resolution that we've introduced to compel the House to vote on that, provided that we have the votes on the floor. And it is tragic in the moment that we're in that we have to wonder whether the Republicans in the House will vote to condemn someone who's been accused of sexual misconduct. This is the moment we're in, and that's unfortunate. The third part of that, if those things don't happen, should it leak? I'm not going to take a position on that. I think it would be better for us to use formal procedures, but we should keep in mind how we got to this point. There are multiple women, it's our understanding, who have come forth and testified anonymously to the Ethics Committee with the understanding that they were providing reports to an Ethics Committee that would keep this in confidence. That takes tremendous courage, right? All of those women are well aware of what happened to Christine Blasey Ford when she came out during the Kavanaugh hearings, which was, of course, only the most recent time in memory that Donald Trump sent a candidate with allegations of sexual misconduct to the Senate for confirmation. How much her life was upended by being public. And if this information leaks out in dribs and drabs from other people, it makes it very hard to make sure that we protect those women and respect them. And The right way to do this, again, the way we minimize that is by the ethics committee doing their job. That would be my hope. But we'll see what happens over the next few weeks.
We're spending time with Congressman Sean Casten, the Democrat, is leading the charge here to force the public release of the Ethics Committee report into Matt Gaetz, who, if you're just joining us, has withdrawn his name from consideration, from nomination to be Attorney General. Does that withdrawal, Congressman, change the vote count to the extent that you had a sense of support for this resolution for when you come back from Thanksgiving? Does withdrawal of Matt Gaetz impact the outcome of your resolution?
I mean, obviously, this news has come so quickly. I've not had the time to talk with any of my Republican colleagues. I don't think it changes the calculus for any of my Democratic colleagues.
Did you have the votes before?
You know, there were certainly Republicans that were I think one came out publicly. Derek Van Orden came out and said that he would support releasing the information. There are other privately who look. This is not betraying any confidences. There are a lot of Republicans who don't particularly care for Matt Gaetz. If this is purely about a personal question, I think that's an open question. I think it's an easy question. I think the separate question of, are there Republicans in the House who are prepared to take actions that would be oppositional to Donald Trump's desire, even if Donald Trump's desire is to nominate someone who is alleged to have committed sexual misconduct? Would they stand up to that? I don't know. But to the extent that there's a tension between those points, then one, I suppose, could speculate that it would be politically easier for Republicans in the House to vote based on their feelings for Matt Gaetz rather than based on their fear of Donald Trump.
Well, Congressman, we appreciate you joining us on this and look forward to seeing the outcome here of this privilege resolution as we deal with this one piece of breaking news. But we've gotten some other breaking news within the last hour as well. I would love you to weigh in on, as a member of the House Financial Services Committee, the chair of the SEC, Gary Gensler, has said now officially he will be resigning on January 20th. For many, this will not be surprising. Donald Trump had promised to fire him anyway. But considering your role in the Financial Services Committee, the idea that the SEC could be critical in these next 4 years in forming the path forward for industries, including the crypto industry, what is your hope here on who will be selected to replace him? What kind of person that will be?
So first, I just have tremendous respect for Chair Gensler. I think he's has certainly done a lot of work, as you all know, during his tenure, and I think has been a very loud advocate for investor protection. There is always a tension, a healthy tension, within the SEC between how far do you go towards investor protection and how far do you go towards maximizing access to capital markets. Everything you push in one direction hurts the other, and vice versa. I would like to see anybody at the SEC who understands that balance and who frankly skews more to the investor protection side, because I've always felt that, part of public service or any position of power is to make sure that you're advocating for the people who aren't in the room as much as you are for the people who are. And the work that Gensler has done to look out for the less sophisticated participants in our financial markets, I think, has been important. We'll see what happens on the Trump side, but I do fear that this is not an administration that has shown nearly as much commitment to investor protection as I would like.
Well, on the market side, it's a celebration. Certainly in the crypto market, we're getting closer to $100,000 for Bitcoin, Congressman. I know you're not necessarily guided by the markets on this, but what does that tell you potentially about the person who may replace Gary Gensler?
Well, look, there is a huge problem, and has been a huge problem in the crypto sector for a long time, that the structure of those crypto exchanges and markets, the use of anonymous wallets, the use of mixers, the use of cross-chain bridges, it is very easy to cover your tracks and has been very attractive as a result to folks who want to launder money, want to get around know your customer rules, want to get around FinCEN, and has also been attractive to a lot of people who want to take advantage of less sophisticated players. to be clear, that's not saying that like one cannot imagine a legal use case for crypto. But a lot of what the crypto industry has not liked about Mr. Gensler is that he has been pushing for a disclosure-based regulatory environment that says if you're going to buy and sell something of value, you need to have the same types of protections, whether whatever that is. And we can quibble about is this the Howey test and all those sorts of issues, but the crypto industry has clearly been pushing for a long time to move themselves out of a disclosure-based regulatory regime at the SEC and into a purely market exchange-based regulatory structure at the CFTC.
Yeah.
And one can't assume that the advocacy for that move accrues to the benefit of investors who depend on those disclosures.
Congressman, we just have a minute left here, but obviously the current chairman of the Financial Services Committee will see his time in Congress come to an end at the end of this session. Is there someone you think would best work with Democrats on a bipartisan basis as the next chair of the Financial Services Committee? Is there a candidate you favor for that role?
In general, I think the Financial Services Committee has done in general a very good job of avoiding some of the more rancorous, vitriolic debates on some of the other committees. I would say that virtually all of the Democrats on the committee have a very good working relationship with Fran Schill. A lot of us have a good relationship with Andy Barr. A lot of us have a very good relationship with Frank Lucas. And we will certainly have our disagreements on policy issues, and some of those, of course, will be animated. But I think all three of those candidates are candidates who have a respect for the institution and a respect for the work of the committee, which is important.
Congressman, it's good to have you back. Let's meet up after Thanksgiving and see how this vote goes. Sean Casten, we appreciate all of your time this week, the Congressman from Illinois' 6th.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.